I'm really happy to welcome Vix Anderton today, who has been a co-student, co-worker, I don't know, like a colleague in some ways. She's also an embodiment coach. She's also an authentic relating facilitator, a recovering perfectionist, and has a specific passion for cyclical living. And I'm sure we'll touch on a bunch of all these different areas today in our chat. But maybe to kick off, is there anything else that people should really know about you before we dive right in?
Oh no, I think you hit all the headlines there. I'm sure that more will come out as we talk. But those are the big things.
Great. So let's dive in with, what does it mean to be a recovering perfectionist?
Yeah. So I think the perfectionist part of that, most people probably have an idea about what that means. For me, perfectionism particularly looks like kind of overachieving, bit of control freak in there. Those are the kind of I've identified like 5 different flavors of perfectionism, but for me, the kind of the overdoing and the control freak are probably the 2 main ones. But the recovering part feels really important to me because for a while on my own journey, I'd kind of identified the streak of perfectionism and I was determined to overcome it. Like, this needed fixing. This was clearly a problem, and I would be a better human being if I wasn't a perfectionist. And what I have come to realize is that is my perfectionism coming out. That my perfectionism basically says that I'm not good enough as I am, and if only I could fix XYZ about me, then life would be good, then I would be happy, and then I would be a worthy human being. And so the recovering
perfectionist trying to kill the perfectionist in you.
Yeah, exactly. The irony of it. But for me, like, I was really getting like stuck in this loop of trying to fix the thing with a tool that was the problem. And so the recovering bit for me is really important to say that I will probably always have these perfectionist tendencies to a greater or lesser degree. And that's okay. Like, that for me, it's a fundamental part of being human. And so the practice is not to get rid of them, but to change my relationship to them. And just, like an addict in any kind of walk of life, that never really goes away. And so it's a practice of choice, of like constantly noticing and deciding that I want to do something different. Because there are times where there are things that I think that are mixed up in perfectionism. So, drive, discipline, attention to detail, these are positive qualities that often get kind of confused with perfectionism. And I want to be able to like tap into those strengths without overdoing it.
Right.
With this thing where I get kind of like really far forward and super focused, and I'm disconnected from myself and I'm disconnected from the people around me. And so the recovery pit is like, I have a choice in every moment to notice how I am, and is this how I want to be?
And the reason why we talk about that is not just like, oh, great, so Vix is a recovering perfectionist. No, the point being that you've also made it your business, isn't it? So yes. When I checked your website, it was like from perfectionist to powerful, and you're helping others also on that journey. So if anyone identifies as a perfectionist here, maybe you want to keep listening. I personally am very much a perfectionist, so I hope that I get some tricks and tools out of this. But what do you mean by from perfectionist to powerful? How does that impede on power?
Yeah, so I think perfectionism actually is really limiting. That it's, I notice like the way that I do perfectionism in my body is rigid and dry and harsh. And I can get a lot done from that place, but it comes from this place of really striving and overriding my body's needs, like overriding my own limits.
So can I pause you for a moment? When you say you do perfectionism in your body, some of our listeners might be like, what the heck does she mean? A little bit of a better idea. Like, how can people get a flavor of what it feels like for them in the body?
Yeah, so, if we take sort of a definition of embodiment as like how we are, how we do things, that our emotions and our tendencies, our patterns don't just exist theoretically in our heads, like they play out through our bodies. And so I notice when I'm in perfectionist mode, I sit further forward. Like I kind of like all my energy comes forward, it comes up, I tense, and like I say, everything becomes kind of rigid and very strict, very focused. Whereas when I do ease in my body, I'm like, I can lean back, I can feel the back of my back of my heart and back of my body, I can breathe more easily. And that's the difference for me. Like, this is why I kind of talk about the power, because I had always dismissed ease or grace as kind of weak. Yeah, that they're like, to be strong meant to be on it and hard. And you know, that very comes from kind of like, I was in the Air Force for 10 years, so there's a huge sort of military background that you know, particular way of being that I grew up in. And what I've actually discovered is that when I take action from this place of ease and resource, I have more stamina, I have more creativity, I feel more powerful. What I've actually realized is this kind of rigid, the strength that comes from perfectionism feels brittle to me. It's actually, I can't sustain it for very long without really hurting myself. And I'm brittle to criticism. I'm brittle to change and uncertainty. Like, I can't adapt from that place. Whereas the more ease I find in my body, which, and you know, ease and wholeness and grace for me are the antidote to perfectionism. I feel a little bit more like a pro goalkeeper, you know, kind of like lighten on my toes and like, oh, which way is the ball going to go? And I feel that I can respond to life rather than having like the ball smack me in the face because I've not seen it coming.
Right, like a dry piece of wood that just cracks versus like a juicy bamboo sprout that's bendable or
yeah, absolutely. And they, you know, like, you know, bamboo's a great example. I can tell that you're in the tropics as well, that like it can carry so much weight. Like bamboo is so strong in a way that for me, like perfectionism, that kind of dry, you know, wood just crumbles in the face of actual pressure.
So I want to pick up on something else you just dropped in there casually. It's like the Air Force. And I think if anyone ever encounters you in a context of authentic relating, they'd be like, oh, this super gentle, sweet, you know, guidance that you have and that heartfelt smile. And then you like drop that. How did you get from Air Force to doing what you're doing now? And maybe it has even, you know, determined you to make that choice. I don't know.
Yeah, total accident. I grew up in a military family, and the Air Force was kind of like my answer to the I don't know what to do when I graduate question. A little bit more than that, like it felt like the right place for me at the time, that there was, even though I had no concept of embodiment or kind of somatic wisdom, there was like, I had a gut feeling this was like the right place for me to be. And I loved it, you know, as an intelligence officer, a very sort of analytical job. I loved international politics. I loved understanding, you know, why were the Iranians taking this posture in the Middle East when we were doing this? Like, it just fascinated me. Until it kind of didn't. Like, I hit that point at sort of 30 that I think lots of people go through, right? Kind of, you know, spent my 20s doing something, and I started to be aware of this little voice that said, I think there's something more for me than this. Like, I don't think this is where I'm meant to be. And I kind of leapt off the cliff without very much idea of what I wanted to do, and ended up working in the international development sector, so particularly around women's rights in conflict, which again I loved, like intellectually incredibly stimulating, but it ultimately led me to burnout. So I had this is where the perfectionism really started kicking in. Like, for somehow in the military, my perfectionism, my embodiment was appropriate to the context that I was in. Like, yeah, I pushed myself really hard, and my instructors on my intelligence training actually had I used to get so caught up making a mistake. They had a phrase for it, like, oh, it's Vix's spiral of despair again. I get so wrapped up in like making a mistake that I couldn't move forward. But it felt appropriate in the military container. Something shifted in when I left, and I lost my peers. You know, I was the most junior person on a senior leadership team, and I had no concept of what good looked like anymore. So my answer was, well, clearly it's not good enough, so I have to work harder. And I burnt myself out. And so had this kind of, existential crisis. I think I'd been out the Air Force for about 3 years, and I had left what was going to be, I think, a really successful career in the Air Force, was good at it. I did not leave to feel depressed, to have suicidal thoughts, to feel like this. And so kind of, I did my yoga teacher training, I embarked into coaching, I tried my hand at tech startups and found myself kind of burning out, like seeing those patterns come up again. And my journey, I found authentic relating completely by accident. I had just broken up from a long-term relationship and was at a little startup festival and was talking to somebody about this breakup, and I was feeling lonely, and I said, I think I missed, it seems like everybody else has got this figured out. Like everybody else around me seems to be able to
Grass is green on the other side.
Well, and again, like kind of perfectionist thinking, it's my fault. Like, yeah. I'm the problem in all of my relationships.
No one else has these problems. It's only me.
7 billion people on the planet. I'm the one with the problem. And the narcissism of perfectionism. And there's some truth to that. Like I did lack some skill in relationship. Years at boarding school in the military had definitely had me shut down my emotions. And what I'm increasingly uncovering is that the more disconnected I am from myself, the harder it is to connect with somebody else. I think we do connection through our bodies, and being somebody who really existed in my head. So there's definitely something to that. And this person that I was talking to just mentioned the fact, I've got a friend and he's doing this workshop in London next week. I think you might really like it. So I went along, and I have to say, I nearly left in the first 20 minutes.
Really?
I got there. Well, this was like the first thing I'd been to 1 5 rhythms class at this point. Like I was not part of this world at all. And I get there, and like everybody is what I would describe as like, everybody's a hippie, all the women look beautiful, and they're wearing these like flowy dresses, and everybody seems to know each other already. I feel quite nervous, and like some guy kind of walks towards me, and like this is like the shadow side of authentic relating. He walks towards me really intensely, looks at me, and he's like, tell me what it is that motivates you most in life.
Oh my God, terrifying.
I think I want a cup of tea. So nearly left, and I'm so glad I stayed, because that weekend broke the armor. It chipped the armor around my heart. And for the first time, I really felt myself, or I think I could appreciate how I felt myself. I'd had this story that I didn't know. And I remember in the very first opening circle, we were asked just to simply share what was alive for us in the moment. So a practice now that I don't give a second thought to. But at the time, I was watching other people in the circle, and people were narrating their internal experience so beautifully, and I was getting more and more upset. Like, don't know how to do this. Oh my God.
Perfectionist coming out again. I don't know how to do this. I must get it right.
Exactly. There's a way of doing this, and it gets to me, and I'm floods of tears by this point. I'm like, I can't feel anything below my neck, and I don't know what I'm doing here, and all. And as a woman there who is now a very good friend of mine pointed out later, it's like the irony was, in that moment you were describing what was alive so authentically that you were doing the thing that you didn't think that you could do. And like, so having these kind of experiences of like, oh, this is what it means to feel and to reveal my experience. And that was about 3.5 years ago, and I've been hooked ever since. It was my route into embodiment, to meeting you and working with Mark, into ecstatic dance, even like coming to Bali and the communities that I've connected with. It all came through this like first sort of chance encounter. Because for me, it was the first place where I felt like I had permission. I had permission to be myself with myself, but also with other people. My whole life had been like, feelings were especially, like, don't feel like, to get on with it. Yeah, like feelings get in the way of taking action. And for the first time, it was like, wow, it's okay to be here and to feel, and I can be. I felt accepted, I felt included with all of the messy, conflicting humanness that goes on inside me.
Right. So would you recommend now every perfectionist listening to this go check out an authentic relating class, or what would be your remedy you suggest?
Yeah, so for me, authentic relating has been my path. There's something about the both the embodiment of authentic relating, but also like the verbal. I'm somebody who thinks out loud, and so for me, kind of verbally processing what's going on and verbally connecting with people really works for me.
Can you outline a little bit more what you mean by the embodiment of the authentic relating? Because maybe some people here have an impression of authentic relating being more of a communication tool, or more of a, you talk to each other, you share verbally. What's the body part? What's the embodiment?
Yeah, so I guess there's two aspects to that. One is, if I'm sharing my experience, I'm revealing my experience in the present moment, I'm tracking both my physical sensations, my emotions, and my thoughts. So that all of that is my experience. And actually for me, one of the most profound ways that I can start to take ownership of my experience as I'm sharing it is to start with the physical sensations. That always feels like the most objective part of my experience. And then I can notice how my body is making, where the emotions feel in my body, and then the stories that my brain is creating about what's going on.
And ownership, not being beating yourself up about it, not like, oh, I feel sadness, oh, I'm such a little
Yeah, no, it's not about that at all. It's actually like really being able to welcome the sadness, and rather than being in my head and telling myself a story and judging the sadness, it's like, wow, my sadness feels like heaviness, and there's like an ache in my heart when I feel sad. And there's somehow like being in the body of my emotion helps me create more space for it. Like I can be with it more without judging it. So there's that aspect of embodiment. But also, what I love about authentic relating, and we call it the hologram. So if you break a hologram, this sort of a 3D image captured on a piece of glass, if you break the glass of a hologram, each individual shard still contains the whole picture. Mm-hmm. And it's a metaphor for, the way that we show up in one aspect of our lives tends to be the way that we show up in all aspects. And relationship, communication is such a powerful mirror for our patterns and our ways of being. And so authentic relating for me, like, it just holds up this like really powerful mirror. I get to see my patterns in action, and then I get to practice something new. I learn new skills so I can develop more range and choice. So next time I'm triggered with my partner, rather than projecting and blaming him and making it all about him, I can choose to show it with a little bit more compassion towards him, towards myself. And we talk about this idea of transforming conflict into intimacy, that these moments where we butt heads and we have different contexts and we're triggered, those are actually a moment, an invitation into vulnerability and into intimacy and greater connection.
Yeah, beautiful. And so what you're saying is you're really using that space, practicing with people you might not even know, or that you don't have that particular relationship with, but you get to discover yourself, your internal experience, and also the way of communicating and relating with them. And that can be translated back into your relationship. Why wouldn't you do it in your relationship?
Sorry?
Why do we need to do that with strangers then? Can we not just go to our partners and do it? I know the answer is no, but tell me why.
People just when I teach students this, and I'm like, how are you going to practice it? They're like, oh, I'm going to use it with my mum. I'm like, great ambition. For me, doing it with the people closest to me is the hardest, because I have all these expectations. It's not that they know which buttons to push. Like, I push my buttons around them. I'm already close to them. So there's something about being able to practice with strangers. And this was something that I really learned from Mark on EFC, that like we need safe places to practice, so places where we can calibrate, the level of difficulty, and where it's okay to make mistakes, where I can get super triggered in a connection with somebody, and I can be supported and I can work it through, and there's no consequence to it in the rest of my life.
Doesn't mean a divorce.
No, exactly. And so I can practice outside of my relationship, and then I can bring those skills into my marriage, and I can apply them, and that's where it actually becomes really, really useful and valuable in my day-to-day interactions. But also, like, I've made, some of my closest friends have come through authentic relating workshops, because I get to know people on this kind of this level of connection and intimacy that perhaps we don't, many of us don't have in everyday life. And so, for me, it's also been a wonderful place to create friendships and new relationships.
Yeah, beautiful. So you've become now one of these beautiful women in flowy dresses, or how do our listeners have to imagine you by now? Living the life in Bali. Air Force was yesterday.
Yeah. So I'm definitely a little bit more Bali-fied. There's definitely a little bit more of that. But yeah, if you see me like knocking around Ubud, I'm still here in like my black denim cut-offs and like Guns N' Roses t-shirt and things. So I've not gone full Ubud. But really, like my path around this is so if I kind of refer to like the 4 elements model, I don't know whether it's through nature or nurture, but I've traditionally been like a really fiery person. I'm really confident in that fire, focus, passionate action energy. And authentic relating and then dance practices have really helped me tap into this more kind of relational, watery, easeful, go with the flow kind of way of being. And so the thing I really like to play with is like, how do I hold both of those at the same time? So rather than oscillating from like one extreme to the other, and because neither one of those feels fully complete to me, it's a little bit like yin and yang, like one without the other loses something of its power. And so for me, I'm constantly about like how do I hold both and how do I do both and in this situation rather than either or, and either or tends to be again very perfectionist thinking.
Right. And it might also be just switching out one for the other and just complying to whatever the external expects from you, rather than integrating and maybe expanding and having that range of possibilities, because we obviously confront it with different environments, different people, and the more ability we have to meet that, in ourselves and in the outside world, I guess, the more whole we can show up in the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, you mentioned like whole, like for me, it's like that is the antidote to perfectionism. If perfectionist says I'm broken and I'm missing something, embodiment practices and for me, authentic relating, cyclical living, dance, like I can be whole and I can expand my range because perhaps I want to show up with more skill or more grace in a certain area of my life. But it's coming from a place of I'm okay. Like I want to be able to do better, but I don't have to. Like I'm fine as I am. Like the world accepts me, or I accept myself as I am, from this place of wholeness. And there's something that feels really good in my nervous system about that. So I notice that when I'm in perfectionist thinking, my nervous system is activated, and I'm trying to find safety through control. Whereas when I kind of tap into this idea of wholeness and range, then there's something in my soul that comes alive, this like natural desire for expansion and growth. It comes from the outside in, rather than, oh my God, like I have to fill the space because I'm not enough as I am.
Right. And I'm aware you do address the nervous system in the work you do, especially when it comes to stress resilience, and that was still probably one of the intermediate steps you were doing between your Air Force life and what you're doing now. Can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, so actually some of the stuff I love to do, and I still do this, is I train aid workers before they go to conflict zones on some of this nervous system resilience work. So the kind of the centering techniques, and I love geeking out on polyvagal theory. Like that's been such a helpful model for me understanding my own reactions to the world. But yeah, I think any of this work to kind of come into more ease and grace is around starting to regulate our nervous system.
So would you say that being a perfectionist is basically one definition of being in a fight-flight response?
Yeah, I think perfectionism, what I'm increasingly curious about is I think that it's getting stuck in hyperarousal. It's stuck in that fight-flight. I have to act. And there's a sense then of like the only way to then rest from that is kind of into dorsal collapse. So it's kind of into exhaustion. I can't go on. It's all hopeless kind of feeling, as opposed to something that's actually, like kind of like ventral vagal, like nourishing parasympathetic rest. So yeah, building
in the way you work with, whether that's like somebody coming to you about perfectionism or also in the stress resilience or the 8 workers, is there like a similar approach to using then?
Yeah, because I think humans are humans, right? And yeah, something that feels really important, especially being here in Ubin, and I don't want to kind of be derogatory, but there's a lot of kind of like woo-woo, energetic, and that's beautiful. I think it's beautiful work and it's much needed. And I think there's something that really needs to be grounded and pragmatic in these approaches. And a lot of the people that I work with seem to really resonate with something that feels very, very clear. And so teaching sort of basic centering tools for people and have them understand why that works. So engaging the intellect, that also feels important. I think I love embodied work. And I think, again, we can also go like into the extreme of that kind of says, well, the intellect isn't important. But I think it's both, when we're really able to integrate a tool or an experience both somatically and intellectually, I think that's when it really sticks for us. It's when it really sticks for me.
Yeah, fully agree. So, but I interrupted you a bit on the 8-worker support you do. You're still offering workshops for that, and
yeah. So I still teach on some hostile environment courses. My colleagues kind of back in the UK. So yeah, I particularly get really into the section. I mean, I also have helped teach the bits around reaction to gunfire and how not to get kidnapped and those kind of bits. But yeah, the bit that I really enjoy is, again, this idea of bridging. Like, how do I bring the person who I was, and then this ex-Air Force officer who has quite deep understanding of security risks and how to manage them, with the embodied coach who understands the importance of nervous system regulation and in resilience and in trauma, and how do I bring both of those together in a way that is credible for this audience who can often be quite skeptical. They're here for security training. So yeah, it's one of my, I was teaching authentic leadership to a bunch of defense aerospace startup founders last night. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, I really love like bringing these worlds together, and seeing like the look on people's faces. And I'm like, wow, you mean I can talk about my feelings at work? Like that could be, and that actually could make me a better leader. That could make me more resilient. That's my one of my favorite things to do.
So what's your trick to crack them and not have them run a mile the other direction when you're sharing what you're sharing? How do you wrap it or package it that it actually lands? Because I fully agree. There's so much really valuable work out there that feels a bit too woo-woo though in its packaging, let's put it that way, or is maybe expressed in a certain way that then denies access to people who are skeptical or who are, maybe don't like certain terms of energy floating around the room. Or yeah,
that's a really good question. Do I really know how I do that? I think some of it's like that habitual way of being that I've been those people, and so there's I think an assumed credibility that they have for me in that space. But I think it also means I kind of use language that they're already using, or that I can talk about the time that I was in Bangladesh, and we weren't allowed to drive on the roads because there were petrol bombs being thrown at buses all the time. I can talk about being under fire in Afghanistan and what that felt like in my body, and how that level of stress was actually making me quite an ineffectual leader at that point. I remember my corporal, actually, this was a little vulnerable to share, my corporal went to my boss because I had lost all sense of empathy, for this guy who was like away from his family and was working like, we were doing like 12-hour shifts opposite each other. I was seeing him for about half an hour a day. And we were being mortared a couple of times a day by this point. And I thought I was used to it. But what I realized now is it's like a chronic level of activation in my nervous system that just switched off any ability I had to be empathetic. And so if I tell a story like that, and of course, the startup founders that I'm talking to don't get shelled, but the aid workers, I do get that. And then to be able to tell a personal anecdote, like if I had these tools then, I would have been a better leader. I would have been better at my job, and I would have been able to care for the people around me more deeply. and made them better at their jobs. We would have been more effective at a unit on military operations at that point, had I been able to regulate my nervous system more. So I think being able to talk about it in that kind of language, you know, the real, again, like kind of real pragmatic, practical aspects of it, lands really well for a lot of people that I work with.
Which also brings me, thank you for sharing that vulnerably here. I hope that we get more of this work out there, especially now in current times. That seems very, very relevant. Which also brings me to, I mean, you're combining all of that, and you have that level of empathy. And there's one more thing I would like to hear more about now. How do you bring in your passion about cyclical living? What does that mean? Because when I hear that, I think of like menstruation, or, you know, it's only for women, or like what do you do with regards to that?
Yeah, so the menstrual cycle is a big part of that. I'm actually going to do a training getting deeper into that this year that I'm super excited about. But what I started to realize, I read a book called When by Dan Pink, which talks about some really great research about, you know, our circadian rhythms and like the timing of kind of everything in our lives. And then doing EFC and hearing Mark kind of talk about his model of cycles, like I started to notice, wow, there's a cycle to everything. And as a perfectionist, my preference is always summer. Like, I love to be in action. And so cyclical living for me has become this permission slip to rest. It's actually saying, like, if I'm doing this well, so it's almost like using my perfectionism to my advantage. If I'm doing this well, I will take time to rest. And whether that's, you know, thinking about the kind of the on-ramp and the off-ramp of my day, you know, the kind of the spring autumn transitions between sleeping and being active in my day, whether it's taking a break over my menstrual cycle, or actually for me, what I've noticed more importantly is if I can take the couple of days off just before I bleed and like give myself the space to not have to do anything, and it really helps my inner critic chill out. If I go into that bleed like still really active, my inner critic just goes nuts with me. But kind of noticing the cycle and rhythm of everything has been it's a real practical permission slip for me. Say that like the way that I am in summer is great, that's so useful, but it's out of place at the winter of any cycle. So I actually, my preference to start with people is to work with the circadian rhythm, or even like our ultradian rhythms, these rhythms that kind of are like a basic activity rest cycle, these like 90-minute cycles that we're operating throughout the day and night. Because like though they're so easy to change, like you get such quick feedback every day. You know, I can try something and I get feedback on it, and I can see kind of progress pretty quickly. Thinking about how I work with clients work with their menstrual cycle, or people that don't have a natural menstrual cycle for whatever reason, even just thinking about like a monthly sprint. You know, organizations like Basecamp operate their business now off a 6-week sprint. So there's a clear period where we complete and we gather in and we look at what we learn, and we give people a little bit of time off so that they are then fully resourced to be able to go again and again and again. Looking at the seasons, it's really interesting for me. I've been in Bali for like 9 months. We've just kind of hit the equinox as you and I are talking, and I'm seeing like pictures back from the UK where they're kind of what I think about as spring, and I'm experiencing it so differently out here. It's like, oh, like what is my relationship to my seasonal rhythm now that I live in the tropics and it's basically either wet or dry?
Wow, I fully relate to that. It's funny living without the actual weather seasons of where I grew up, and having no winter where you actually naturally slow down because there's less light, there's, you know, temperatures are really low, and not having that impacted me massively in my awareness of even which month it is of the year. If I wouldn't have a work-related necessity to check which month and day it is, I would probably lose track.
Yeah, I really feel you. And then like coming into the southern hemisphere, so like this equinox is taking us into autumn here, and I'm like, do I feel autumnal? Like where am I? So, you know, looking at kind of the seasons, but also then recognizing that every activity that we engage in as human beings has a rhythm to it. So, you know, our conversation, how I tackle a project, I'm running a group program at the moment called the Decelerator, so a place where people can slow down in order to get stuff done. And that has, I've really built cyclical living into that. There's a very clear spring phase, we have a clear summer phase, there's an autumn, a winter, so that as people going about their projects on that program, that kind of sense of rhythm is really, that cadence is built in. It brings me such joy to kind of play with, where do people feel resistance, where are people like finding that, and I've noticed that people particularly find the transitions difficult, the springs and the autumns of cycles. I think that's true for me. I find autumn's very difficult. If I'm fully in winter, if I'm fully in rest, or I'm fully in summer, there's kind of an ease that I feel grounded, like I know what I'm meant to be doing.
So winter equaling the resting period, just to make that more clear. The resting period is something where you don't do anything. You actually go into hibernation, or, even within a yoga class, you have the Shavasana corpse pose at the end. You rest and integrate before you actually start something else, or are you in the full activation, which would be the summer, and then the slowing down and wrapping things up. And
absolutely. Thank you for kind of like making that even clearer. So I noticed that for a lot of people, the move from one to the other, from like, okay, I'm really clear that I'm resting right now, and I'm really clear that I'm doing stuff, but this kind of like, how do I get from one to the other? How do I slow down at the end of my day? Like, that can be the bit that gets kind of like clunky.
So can you give us one top tip you have, how to slow down and end your day? Because if we stick with the, circadian rhythm, or the rhythm of the day, because making it accessible for men who might not have a menstrual cycle, what would you suggest to help these transitions?
Ritual and routine, I think, are so important, both at the start and the end of the day. And like, the analogy I often use with people is like, it's driving a car. So like, the winter, the rest is like your car is stationary at your house. Summer and full activation is you're driving at 60 miles, 100 miles an hour down the motorway. And the transitions are kind of like the on and the off ramps. You hit an off ramp at 100 miles an hour and kept going with your foot on the gas until you hit a stoplight, like bam, like you give yourself whiplash because you have to stop so quickly. And that's what most of us do at the end of the day. And so it's about kind of like easing off the gas slowly. So like, when is that point in your day where you start to slow down? And it is about like, the smoother you can make that glide slope, and having kind of ritual and boundaries around that for yourself. This is where kind of the discipline and the structure comes back in to say, no, I will log off at this time, 6 p.m.
No more social media past 9 p.m. or
exactly. So how am I withdrawing stimulation? I also really like kind of practices. Am I allowed to swear? Is that okay?
We're on the Embodiment podcast.
I just wanted to check. One of the practices I really like to do is win, fuck, win. So at the end of the day, I'm like, what am I proud of? What's really annoyed me today? And then another win. Or
nice sandwich.
my to-do list. So rather than having to-do list at the start of the day, like, what is it that I've accomplished today? Like, those kind of practices help me cultivate a bit more of that autumn completion learning, kind of wrapping up energy, so that I can then start to let the day go and slow down before I get to bed. But yeah, less and less stimulation. And then the opposite at the beginning of the day. So where this really came home for me, I noticed that I was getting up and immediately going out for a run. And then I was coming back to meditate. But like, I just had this sense of, it just felt like fast. And I was like, actually, that's what happens if I move things around. So I started getting up, and I would allow myself to meditate and journal, kind of wake up a little bit more, and then I would go for a run, and then I would get into work. And so just having this, like, just moving the things in my routine around gave me more of this glide slope back into activation, rather than hitting my day at, okay, maybe not 100 miles an hour, but 10k an hour. Really made a difference to how I was able to ease into the day and then ease back out of it. Right.
Which obviously links a lot to how do we do rest? How do we, take care of our own nervous systems, all the awareness of that cycles. model, and as such can really allow us to move away from the perfectionism, or being stuck in fight flight, or building resilience, or whatever it is. So they're all very linked. I can already see.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if somebody now came to you and was like, so I'm a perfectionist and it fucks with my life and I need help, what's the first thing you would do with them?
Welcome to the club.
You're not alone.
Not alone, because again, like that can be, as like I said earlier, oh my god, it's just me. So actually that is often the place I start with people, of like, how can I help them feel like it's okay? So rather than coming out as like, it's fucking with my life and I'm broken and I want to fix it, can we start to cultivate a little more softness around it? So again, like working with the body. So like, how do you do softness in your body? Like, so I really like yes pose from the embodied yoga poses encyclopedia, I forgot what to call it. So kind of like allowing my back to relax against the chair, turning my palms up, allowing my breath to be a little bit slower. So yeah, starting from this place of kind of acceptance and almost gratitude. So I often have people kind of like, really focus on like, how has perfectionism served you? Because most of the people I work with are actually pretty like traditionally successful. They have good jobs or businesses, and they have partners and children and houses and like all of the things that we are told make us successful. And so yeah, really helping people kind of like, wow, actually this survival strategy has really served me. And so this isn't about getting rid of it. This isn't about cutting off my left arm. This is about noticing how this has served me, and then recognizing, yes, I want to be able to do something else. And so then I might kind of look at with something specific, what is the something else, and what is the range that you want to build here? Because I think a lot of the time people come like, I want to stop doing this. Like, okay, right, great. Right. What would you like to be able to do instead? Because I find it much easier to build something than it is to stop doing something else. And then it's iteration, and it's practice and experimenting and it not working, and like the whole perfectionism thing coming up again because it's not working. Like, okay, great, let's go through that cycle again, and keep honing, keep practicing, keep coming back to the awareness that I experience my perfectionism like whack-a-mole. Like every time I think I've got a bit of a handle on it, and I'm like, yes, I'm finding more ease and grace, suddenly like the perfectionism troll comes in like wearing a different hat. It's like, you weren't expecting me here. Okay, here we go again.
So in some way it sounds like it's more of an ongoing practice and integrating that into your day-to-day life than it is a matter of like you say, fixing something, getting rid of it, and learning new habits, integrating like different ways, rest, becoming aware maybe of cycles and how you do them.
Yeah, absolutely. I spent 35 years practicing being a perfectionist. I got really, really good at it.
So unpracticing that, practicing something else.
I need to give myself more than 3.5 minutes to to start to learn to do something different. So I'm hoping maybe when I'm 70 I'll be more more easeful and graceful than I am perfectionist. But that neural pathway, that way of being will still be there somewhere, and that's okay. Like it gets to be part of the journey. I'm reminded of Elizabeth Gilbert's got a beautiful passage in Big Magic where she's writing to her fear, and she's basically like, creativity and I are going on a car journey, and fear, I know you're going to come along and you're welcome to do that, but you're not allowed to see the map, dude, like you're not even allowed to play with the stereo. And that's how I feel about my perfectionism, that it gets to come on the journey with me, but increasingly I want adult resourced me to be in the driving seat and to be making the decisions, and the perfectionism and the inner critic and all of those other things that we're told. I got so angry at New Year seeing all of these posts on Instagram with people saying, leave your imposter syndrome behind in 2021. Like, A, it's that easy, but B, that we'd even want to, like that those parts of me have a role, like, you know, Richard Sforza's work on internal family system, like these parts of us are here for a reason and they get to come along in the journey. But I want adult resourced Vix to be in the driving seat and deciding what we listen to on the radio, rather than allowing those children to kind of take over the bus.
Right. I love all the car metaphors you're bringing. But also it really comes back to that integrated wholeness that we keep mentioning, that it's not about leaving Vix, the Air Force, you know, person behind, but actually how can I still maintain and keep some of what may be valuable traits you know and skills you've developed, and then still also embrace the new hippie and find a good middle bit. So it sounds like that's really what your work is about. And what I really appreciate as well, and people will notice probably, we'll also put your website under here as a link, is that you do all of what you do with that intention of staying authentic. So there's never kind of like, oh, you know, I'm this, and presenting yourself in a particular way that you think others will like, or, you know, selling yourself in any way, but it really comes from a place of, okay, this has been my journey and I have, you know, these skills and I've gone through it myself, and I'm happy to share and take you along. And, you know, you've walked that path yourself, and you're probably quite a few steps ahead of some people and might be able to take them along and show them the way.
Yeah, I see it a little bit like being a Sherpa. That, you know, like I'm still climbing the mountain with you, like it's still tough for me, and I'm still having to like navigate some of the same challenges, but I'm getting more experience at it. I'm doing it kind of more and more times, and I'm definitely able to carry a bit of the load for people, and to kind of like point the way. I've navigated some of the crevices and gone, yeah, we shouldn't go that way. Let's go this way instead. So yeah, that's very much, and I'm delighted to hear that that's kind of like your perceiving that in the way that I'm kind of coming across online. Discovering authentic and ethical marketing has been a big part of my business journey.
Because I noticed that I read one page was like, you have an ebook, and it's like, I'm not, you know, selling it for your email address. I think there's one line on your website where I felt like a lot of websites and businesses do that. They just want your email address to give you something, and you addressing that in that way, I think it's really showing that you're living the authentic relating bit of vulnerability, honesty, transparency. Yeah.
Thank you. So to give that credit, that's a suggestion from an organization called the Ethical Move. And so they have a whole kind of a little pledge that business owners can take, and like lots of really practical ideas to bring more authenticity, ethics, and I think, you know, what you and I would talk about, being trauma informed in the way that we sell as coaches, because I think so much of the kind of the marketing that is out there is actually kind of actively playing on people's traumas. It'd be really easy as a perfectionist. I can fix if you're a perfectionist, I can fix your problem. Right? I would probably get way more clients if I marketed like that, but it feels so gross in my system, and is the antithesis of actually what it is that I want to do with people. Yeah, I really recommend people check out the Ethical Move and take the pledge.
And also check out you if this and you resonate with what you're hearing and how Vix is sharing. I think it's really about the how, like you as a person having integrated all of that in yourself. It's not about, you know, probably a bunch of other people work with perfectionism, as you say, but if you resonate with what you've heard here, where can people find you? What do you offer currently? What's out?
Yeah, so I've just closed doors on my latest group program, the Decelerator, but that will definitely be back later on in the year. I'm super excited about it. So I offer one-to-one coaching. I offer like a monthly, it's called Connection Cafe, like a monthly kind of sharing circle where we get to practice. That's coming back into that dojo and this like practice of authentic relating. Yeah, there might even be an in-person retreat here in Bali later on in the year for anybody that's interested. So yeah, recommend check out the website, and Instagram is the place where I am currently kind of spending most time on social media. So I'm at Vix_Anderton over there. Yeah, I'm really enjoying actually connecting with people on Instagram. So rather than kind of like hiding behind the screen and just, you know, liking and things, actually, like I'm really enjoying connecting with people. So I'm gonna chat.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Vix. It's been really inspiring each time. I know you for a couple of years now. I mean, knowing. So I know about you. I know a little bit of your journey, but it impresses me each time again to hear your story and hear your journey from the Air Force all the way to where you are. And also having seen the changes and shifts in you over the last few years, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, having been like a mentor on EFC, I remember you and I first meeting that weekend in Brighton, like 3 years ago now, something like that. And it's been quite a journey for both of us, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I can vouch for you. Like, and also what you bring and the tools you use. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us here on the Embodiment podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. I have to confess, actually, when you reached out to me, so when I first came across Mark's work, I was listening to the Embodiment podcast, and I remember having a little daydream about being interviewed on the podcast, and here I am. So I feel
interviewed by me, not by Mark, which might be.
This is much more fun. We won't tell him that. But,
he will just listen to this.
But yeah, so this is this feels like a little bit of an accomplishment for me to be established enough to be here. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, thank you.